Good Wednesday afternoon to you, 4 o'clock time for Sports4CLE. Hope you're having a great afternoon. Thanks for joining us. NFL free agency closing in, legalized tampering beginning part of next week, and we are thrilled to be joined by former NFL general manager Michael Lombardi. He's the host of the Lombardi Line on VSiN, also has written a book, Football Done Right. Michael, appreciate the time very much. At this time of year, as an NFL GM, how do you balance what you need in free agency versus the draft, and how do you approach that relative to building out a roster?
Well, a lot of it just is team building, right? You can only get certain things from the draft, and you can't find that in free agency. It's hard to find quarterbacks in free agency. It's hard to find, great defensive rush ends in free agency. Typically, they don't make it to the market. Rarely does a player like Christian Wilkins from the Miami Dolphins, 10 sacks, can play the run really well, make it to the market. But then it becomes very expensive. So you have to have a team philosophy, right? You got to draft offensive and defensive linemen. You got to find the quarterback in the draft, and then you got to pick the pieces, and you've got to do a good job of economically valuing the talent that's out there as it relates to your salary cap and what you believe you need. So it's a combination. They work in concert together, but the nucleus of your team has to come from the draft.
And I would imagine it's got to be developed. It's not like, boy, we're drafting these guys, they're ready to go. And so is there a degree of patience as well?
Yeah. Player development requires it. Look, everybody gets so excited about the draft, but let's be clear. Last year's draft will have more impact on the Browns team in 24 than the 24 draft will. It's just human nature, especially when you're picking in the 20s and you're picking lower and you have a good team. It's harder to make a team. And so what you have to do is have that player developed. And so by November and December, when you really need the young player to take a giant step forward, they're ready to go.
So big news last couple of days, Broncos are officially moving on from Russell Wilson after they traded a lot of draft capital and some players to get him. Browns fans are drawing some parallels between that trade and the Deshaun Watson trade. Obviously, Watson hasn't been able to play to the level the Browns wanted him to. Some of it's been because he's been hurt. How difficult is it to acquire a quarterback and have him fit into your system?
Or know what the system is. I think with the shift in offensive coordinators, firing Van Pelt, bringing Dorsey in, it tells me that the Browns are searching for what scheme they want to put around Deshaun Watson. Is it that Josh Allen scheme, which is a lot of him running, that Ken Dorsey ran at Buffalo? Because with Stefanski's scheme, it's more of what Kyle Shanahan does. It's the Kubiak scheme. It's what was in Minnesota blended into the West Coast. So, I don't know if that's the right idea for Deshaun in terms of what it requires mechanically, footwork, all those things. Deshaun in Houston, when he was playing at a high level, was able to make a lot of plays with his feet, throw the ball down the field. Will Fuller, the Notre Dame star that was their first-round pick years ago, made a career on the deep ball from Deshaun. We haven't seen that in Cleveland yet. So I think they're searching for how to make the player better. Football is different than baseball. You can play third base for the Guardians, and then you get traded to the Mets, and you can play the next day. But in football, the scheme is really entices the player to a higher level, and I think that's something that we search for.
When you look at Watson, what have you seen from him? There have been glimpses that, the game against the Ravens, he did what you want a franchise quarterback to do. He was limping around, and he found a way to take the ball and get them a win against a really good football team. What have you seen when you look at Deshaun Watson?
Inconsistency in everything, mechanics, fundamentals, accuracy. I mean, he's been in the game you're citing was his best game, and it was really just the second half. And then look, in fairness to Deshaun too, without Nick Chubb there, they relied so much on Chubb. I thought the Browns did, and why Stefanski won Coach of the Year is because they overcame so many injuries and losing both starting tackles and having to maneuver the offensive line. I think one of the big areas the Browns are going to have to take a step forward is losing Bill Callahan as their line coach. He did a great job for them. can they overcome that? Are they going to be able to get the same production out of their offensive line that they had when Callahan was there?
So we've all seen, the names of the quarterbacks. There's 30-some quarterbacks that the Browns have gone through, and that kind of led them to trading for Deshaun Watson. Take a look at this in conjunction with that, though. These are wide receivers that the Browns have drafted since 2010. The first rounder, Corey Coleman's the only one. Second rounder, Greg Little, Josh Gordon in the supplemental round, so that he goes as a second rounder. Third rounders are these are guys that Andrew Berry's drafted. Tillman, Schwartz didn't work out, Bell. Fourth rounders, Benjamin, Ricardo Lewis, Callaway, Malley. Fifth rounders, Higgins, played in the league a couple of years, Peyton. Seventh rounder, you did get Donovan Peoples-Jones. Michael Woods has been hurt. It's a passing league, and I'm not telling you anything that you don't know. Quarterback and wide receiver, they've struggled so mightily to identify those. How do you overcome that?
Well, I mean, you put a lot of regimes up there, right? So there are different people doing the evaluations, and that makes it challenging too. Receiver is the hardest position to evaluate because in college football, we don't see press coverage. Very rarely do you see a corner jump up on a receiver and play man-to-man in his pocket. It's off coverage. It's easy to get into the route, and so it looks a lot better. And I think you have to do a really good job of nailing down that group. Pittsburgh has forever done a tremendous job of that. And I think a lot of it is just identifying the skill set that you need within the position and making sure you can develop that skill set, right? So, look, I think it's hard. It's a challenge. Everybody wants you to draft receivers in the first round. The problem is you can find receivers in the second, third, and fourth round that if you evaluate them correctly, whether it's Deebo Samuel, A.J. Brown, those guys, you end up with a really good player. Look, I mean, when you look at that list, Josh Gordon was as good a talented player, but the character off the field eliminated how he could play on the field.
What do you think, what skill sets do you think from a receiver maximize Deshaun Watson's talents as a quarterback? What plays with what he does well?
Well, Will Fuller was a great down-the-field vertical receiver. He was not durable. One of the reasons he would hurt. I think if you go back through and look at Deshaun's numbers when Fuller was playing and he wasn't, they're kind of different. I think he needs a vertical guy that can make plays on the deep ball, that can catch the deep ball. It's not so much getting open. Schwartz can get open. The problem is, can he catch the ball when he got open? That's always was the problem with Schwartz coming out of Auburn. So I think you have to find the right blend. Building a receiving core is a little bit like building a basketball team. You want to have certain positions so that you can utilize the matchups as it comes to the corners on the field. And you want to have a big guy, you want to have a mid-sized guy, you want to have a point guard type guy. But for Watson to be successful, his yards per attempt down the field, it's got to be explosive plays because there's going to be too many times where you're going to be inconsistent. But you got to hit that home run. And I think he needs that kind of guy who can track the ball down the field and make plays.
So these are some guys that are potentially available via trade. They're thinking T. Higgins, they're tagging him. Bengals aren't trading him to the Browns. Brandon Ayuk, he's going to cost a lot. Deontay Johnson. Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, those guys you might be able to get. Mike Williams I would throw in there from the Chargers. Do any of those guys play with what Watson does well, do you think?
Mike Williams certainly does, but he's coming off an ACL, so you got to be worried about that. Brandon Ayuk's a free agent. You can just sign him if the 49ers don't sign him. He would be an outside receiver. Too often we just label position receiver, and some guys are inside receivers and some guys are outside. T. Higgins is a number one outside receiver, but he's got Jamar Chase on the other side, which helps him tremendously. So when they roll the coverage to Chase, Higgins can win against him. I think you have to find somebody that can play outside receiver. That's the key. When you have, Deebo Samuel, for as great as he is with the ball in his hands, he's not an outside receiver. He's an inside receiver. He's a running back that plays wide receiver, and he does it fabulous. But as a route runner, that's not his specialty. His specialty is running a 5-yard slant and taking it to the house. And I think that's two things that Watson needs. He needs a big receiver for the inside routes, and he needs somebody to track the ball down the field.
So when you look at this free agent class as a whole, we now know who's tagged, who's not, there's a guy that's transitioned. Who do you think some of the high-end guys that are difference makers in free agency this year will be?
Well, I mean, I think Christian Wilkins will be a huge difference maker in free agency. It's hard to find defensive tackles that can rush the passer, that can clog up the middle. I mean, if they signed Christian Wilkins to go along with Myles Garrett, you got two guys that when you rush five guys like Schwartz likes to do, they're going to be one-on-one. It's going to be hard to block them. See, I think you build strength on strength. I think the strength of the team was their defense. Now, it didn't play well down the stretch. You know, Zadarius Smith is a free agent. Hey, how productive was he down the stretch is something I think they've got to evaluate. But to me, if the Browns are going to repeat the season they have, it's going to be building on the defense. It isn't going to be, well, we got to find 17 skill players to come in here. I think if they had Christian Wilkins in that defensive front, that would make them really tough to play.
Yeah, you answered the question I was going to ask you because he seems tailor-made for what Jim Schwartz likes to do.
Yeah, no question. He's a good player. He's a young player. It's rare that he makes it to the open market. These kind of guys typically don't. You know, and everything else. Look, you have to make concessions in free agency and with roster building. There's some things you're just going to have to wait on and you can't get fixed, and you're going to have to take a young player to do it. And they still have the draft to do it.
Browns, a lot of offensive changes on the coaching staff. Ken Dorsey, you mentioned they lost Bill Callahan. Andy Dickerson comes in. Deuce Staley's now the running back coach. Tommy Rees, the tight ends coach. And we touched on this a little bit. Is this all aimed at trying to unlock the skill set that is Deshaun Watson's, do you think?
Well, I think a lot of it is to let Kevin take a step back and be a head coach, you know, kind of play complementary football, you know, be the head coach, get the offense to understand how they need to play this week to win the game, to get the defense to play, and how it's all going to tie together. I mean, I think too often in the league, we have coaches looking at their play sheets and not the game. And I think sometimes that affects the overall team in all three phases. So, you know, look, I think it's going to be hard to overcome Bill Callahan. They got to fix the tackle position based on the health of the two starting tackles. You know, they could definitely use another defensive tackle, an edge guy to come in there. So I think to me, you know, if when you take a step back like Kevin's going to do, it can make you become a better coach. You can coach the coaches, which ultimately has to happen.
Ken Dorsey, the guy they brought in as the offensive coordinator. At the Combine, anybody that I talked to about him seemed to rave about him as a quarterback coach. Is that kind of the MO that he has a really good feel for coaching quarterbacks and especially mechanics?
Well, yeah, I don't know. I don't know Ken personally. I know that, you know, he played the position, so he was well coached when he was coming out of college at the University of Miami. And so, look, I think it's a great opportunity for him. You know, he became the fall guy up in Buffalo, which I'm not sure that's always the case. Coaching Josh Allen is interesting because there's plays that Josh Allen makes that you don't have on a blackboard, nor do you have in your playbook. He's just that kind of rare player. And sometimes you can fall privy to that, and you can start to expect him to do things that typically no one else can do.
So before I let you go, I'm curious your thoughts on this. Who do you think's under more pressure this year? Andrew Berry, Kevin Stefanski, or Deshaun Watson? Kevin Stefanski, 4 years, he's twice been Coach of the Year. Who do you think the pressure falls on to get this right?
I think the organization. I think it's all. Everybody feels the pressure, right? When you win a little bit, you know, Vince Lombardi had a great saying: "The greatest reward for doing is the opportunity to do more." And the Browns have a chance to do more, but it's going to take all three elements to do more. It's going to take a great year from the offense, the defense, off the field, the free agency, developing the players, you know, the ownership. It's going to take an organization to get to the next level, because climbing Everest, and that's ultimately what you're doing, you know, the last 55 feet are always the hardest.
Michael Lombardi, former NFL general manager, thanks so much for the time and the insight. Appreciate it very much. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Michael Lombardi, make sure you check him out. The Lombardi Line on VSiN. He also has written Football Done Right, a really, really good football book. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. We continue talking Browns. Scott Petrak, Browns beat reporter for the Elyria Chronicle Telegram. Straight ahead. Stay with us on Sports for CLE.
All right. right, everybody. Let's take 5. With one of these 5 Lady Luck scratch-offs from the Ohio Lottery.
Like the $5 25X. It's a nice way to nab up to 150 grand.
The Lady Luck family of scratch-offs is the Ohio Lottery's first ever, with 5 price points from $1 to 20. They're an easy way to break into some fun.
We continue talking Browns on Sports4CLE. Let's welcome in Scott Petrak. He's the Browns beat reporter for the Elyria Chronicle-Telegram. You can read him on brownzone.com as well. Scott, let's talk a little bit about Joe Flacco. You've kind of talked to his agent. He wants to come back, is what we're hearing from multiple people. What do you know about that, and how? What's the thinking behind it?
Yeah, I was surprised, Dave. I thought, I think I was assuming what everybody else was, that Joe wanted to go to an opportunity where he had a better chance to play, right? I mean, I talked to him at the end of the year. We all talked to him. We all heard, his quotes and asked him the questions, and it was all about wanting to play. So I was surprised when his agent, Joe Linta, told me that coming back to Cleveland was Flacco's first choice. And I wrote it down when he said it, and then I went back a couple times. I go, hey, I just want to make sure I heard you right. Coming back to the Browns is his first choice. And he's like, yep. So, I think part of it's probably Joe Flacco's not going to get a starting job somewhere. He's 39 years old. Now, could he get a chance to go be a backup for somebody less established than Deshaun Watson? Sure. And I think that's what he would weigh. But right now, he just liked the organization in Cleveland so much. He liked the town, the fans, how he was embraced, that, at least according to his agent, and I have no reason not to, believe that opinion, that he wants to come back to Cleveland before looking for a better opportunity somewhere else. So I thought that was really interesting. From the Browns' perspective, to me, the only holdups are, do you think you could do better as a player? And, we could discuss that. But Joe Flacco was really good. We all know that, right? Led him to the playoffs. How would the money work? And Linta didn't think money would be an issue. He wasn't going to hold up the Browns for a huge contract. And then how that fit is with Deshaun Watson, right? Joe Flacco won over so many fans. He's so established. Would it be awkward for him to be the backup? And at the end of the year, we asked a bunch of players that. We asked Kevin Stefanski, Andrew Berry, and they all said no. Linta said no, that Joe Flacco backed up Zach Wilson, and he was fine in that role. Obviously, he wants to play, but he knows how to do that role. He supported the starter. So it feels like kind of all the pieces are in place for Flacco to come back. So now it's just a matter of, does it really get done?
You would think that the Browns would want a veteran backup. And Andrew Berry, I believe at the Combine he said it's a top 30 position. I think last year with DTR, and it's nothing against DTR, if you're a team that expects to be a playoff team making a deep playoff run, you need a guy that has been there, done that at the quarterback position.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and I'm sure we've talked about it. You saw it across the league, right? It wasn't just a Browns thing. Across the league, starting quarterbacks got hurt at maybe a higher rate than ever. And to me, that reinforces the importance of a backup quarterback, because I understand both sides of the argument that, hey, if you lose your starter, you're kind of screwed anyway, so do you need to invest in the backup? But I think last year showed that, hey, you can still win if you have the right backup. If your starter only misses, let's say 6 to 8 weeks, that doesn't need to end the season for you. Even if he misses the end of the season, right? Like Deshaun Watson, Flacco got him to the playoffs. They had a chance to win playoff games, in my opinion. Obviously, they lose the opener, but with Flacco playing like he did at the end of the regular season, you could have competed with a lot of teams, I felt like. So I think it has reinforced or even maybe altered the importance of the backup quarterback across the league. I think it should for the Browns. Number one, they have high goals, right? They want to go win a Super Bowl. Number two, your quarterback's coming off an unprecedented shoulder surgery for a quarterback. And while the Browns expect him to be back to himself, he's going to start throwing any day now, there's still questions there. And whether it's coming off the shoulder surgery, whether it's the fact that he had the rotator cuff injury earlier in the year that sidelined him, you need a plan B. And I think that plan B needs to be good, and it can't be calling Joe Flacco in November. You have to have that guy from day one. Now, you could discuss, is Joe Flacco the best option? And the Browns have to consider that. But I think you do need an established veteran, and Flacco is certainly one of those guys.
So our favorite term, legalized tampering, gets underway in the NFL Monday and Tuesday, and then you can start signing everybody to actual contracts on Wednesday of next week. How active do you think Andrew Berry is this year in free agency? Past couple of years, he's been very active.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a balance there. And I asked Andrew about that at the Combine. And I said, coming off the playoff success, where your roster is, will you have a different approach? Will you be less aggressive? And he said it's not about what they did last season, but it's more about the roster. And he feels like, and I agree with him, that the roster's in a better spot than it has been in any of his 4 previous off seasons. So therefore, you don't need to go sign 5, 6, 7 guys, and you don't have to do that early in free agency. Having said that, I know how Andrew Berry operates as a general manager, and he's got an aggressive nature. And I just don't think that goes away. So I think the plan is more maybe sign 1 or 2 guys on the first day, reset, let the market come to you. But I'd still be stunned if he didn't go make one splash move, if he can make it work, right? If the money aligns, if the position and player align, I think I'll have one guy in mind, or maybe a couple guys or one position, and go attack that specific target.
So on the defensive line, let's look at free agency. Do you think they try to go, is the plan, do you think, to go more one-year deals, high value, kind of like they did Shelby Harris and Maurice Hurst, maybe even those 2 exact guys bringing them back? Or do you think they try to find a stud like Christian Wilkins, who was not franchised by the Dolphins? And before you answer, take a look at this. This is from Daniel Jeremiah, NFL Network. He's surprised that Wilkins didn't get tagged, and his thought process is, can you imagine pairing Wilkins with either Max Crosby or Myles Garrett? Now, you know who else is probably excited about that thought? Is Jim Schwartz, because Christian Wilkins is the kind of guy that thrives in Jim Schwartz style of defense.
Yeah, when we talk about attacking that one player, to me, Wilkins makes a ton of sense. And I haven't written this yet, and I'm still kind of tossing it around in my head, but I think if I'm constructing the perfect Browns free agent scenario, it's Christian Wilkins, and then you figure it out after, right? And we're going to talk about other positions coming up, but I like that spot. And they spent a bunch of money on Dalvin Tomlinson last year, right? 4 years, $57 million. So they've never shown. It's coming up on Andrew Berry's 5th year, right? This is 5th offseason. He and Putty Podesta, they've never shown the willingness to spend on 2 defensive tackles, right? But this could be different. And the fact that you said Jim Schwartz, I think, is important, because we know how much he relies on that front 4, right? Calls it the engine of the defense. We know how much he rotates those guys, goes 8, 9 deep. And you have to be stout across the entire front. And, they could still bring back Shelby Harris. They could bring back Maurice Hurst II. But they would still be a piece short. And I think if you go get Wilkins and pair him next to Tomlinson, then you're not short at all. And then you're talking about building, perhaps the best defensive line in the league. And I know Jim Schwartz would be, all for that. And I know the Browns believe in building in the trenches. So I don't know how it fits financially. I don't know if they say, hey, we can't spend, what would be, let's call it $15 million a year for Tomlinson and $20 million a year for Wilkins. Maybe that feels that's too much. But I like that idea, I like that thinking, and I like that player.
So we know defensive line is an area that they're probably looking to upgrade. Wide receiver's probably another. Would you be surprised if they drafted a wide receiver and also signed? And I don't think you look at the free agents, the names that are out there, none of the guys that wow you they've all been tagged and probably aren't going to be available in free agency. But do you think they go get a veteran and a young developmental guy?
I do. It just seems to make sense to me. And I think they value evaluate their receivers at a higher level than we do, meaning they like them more than a lot of people on the outside. So, you got Amari Cooper, everybody understands is number one. But Elijah Moore, Cedric Tillman, right? And then it's David Bell. So I think the Browns would be well off if they went and got two more guys, right? Drafted a guy, signed a guy, that gives you 5, David Bell 6, whatever. You can figure that out later. But I like the idea of kind of the dual track where you get the veteran who's established, whether he fits as a 2, fits as a 3 with more, you can figure that out. And then another young guy to add to that mix, especially because Cooper's going to be in the last year of his contract unless it gets extended, and so is Elijah Moore, right? So you have to think about the future. That's why I don't think you can just be satisfied with signing or trading for a veteran.
So this is another underrated free agent, if you will, to keep in mind for the Browns. Texas edge rusher Jonathan Grenard, best season without question under Jacques Cesar, and that is the Browns' new defensive line coach. 12.5 sacks, 15 tackles for loss, 1 forced fumble a season ago for Grenard. And Grenard is, he's done it for a year. I don't know that he had a great year. Is he going to get, that level of contract based on 1 year? It's an interesting question, and you certainly have a guy that knows how good he can be.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we saw how good he was, when the Browns played the Texans and studying the film of the Texans before the playoff game. You showed the sack number, big sack total. My initial thought on that night, somebody texted me the other day about him. And what do you think about him? My first reaction was it's going to be too expensive. But, I looked at Spotrac, and not that, that's the end-all be-all, but they do market values for some of the big-name free agents. And they had him coming in at, I want to say, 13.5 a year with the new deal. That's not crazy, right? Like, I kind of feel like Zadarius Smith's going to command 11 or 12. I prefer Grenard at 13.5. Now you'd have to commit probably more years. I don't know if they would pay a new end and Wilkins. So you'd have to sort through all that. But from strictly, do you like Jonathan Grenard? Yeah, I do. And $13.5 million a year would not scare me. Now, if it started to get above 15, creeping on 20, I don't think you can pay both ends like that. But as a player, I like him. He's a big enough guy and can really get after the quarterback.
Scott Petrick, Browns beat reporter for the Elyria Chronicle-Telegram, as well as BrownZone.com on the internet. He and I can take a quick time out other side of the break. We will continue to talk Browns off-season, free agency right around the corner. What might the Browns do? Sports4CLE will be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns with Scott Petrick, Browns beat reporter for the Elyria Chronicle-Telegram, as well as BrownZone.com on the internet. This from the Bleacher Report, describing every NFL team's top offseason priority in one sentence. And for the Browns, find Deshaun Watson another reliable wide receiver, or that huge investment will continue to have a ceiling. Scott, we've talked about this just last segment. I tend to agree more with the thought they need somebody. In listening to Andrew Berry at the Combine, I'm not sure they feel that's that high of a priority.
Yeah, I'm sure they feel they need to upgrade it. But I'm with you. I don't know if Andrew goes, hey, we need to go out and get another big-time receiver. We've heard him talk about how Amari Cooper's number one, and you can consider David Njoku a number two. Right, and those are both Pro Bowl targets, and not a lot of teams have that. So I disagree with that. If you're boiling it down to a sentence, I would disagree with that. You can talk about the health of Deshaun Watson is more important in my mind. The defensive line as a whole is more important. But I understand the sentiment, and I do agree that you need to support Deshaun Watson in as many ways as possible, right? You have so much money invested in him, so many resources, and he hasn't been that player yet, mostly, or at least a large amount, because he hasn't been on the field enough. But you still need to do everything you can to make him the best quarterback he can be for you, the most productive quarterback, and that includes adding talent. So I understand that, but I also understand if you're the Browns saying, hey, we're paying this guy a ton of money, don't make the guys around you better, right? Joe Flacco came in, and Elijah Moore got better, David Njoku got better, right? So there is something to be said for the quarterback supposed to raise the talent level, but in the circumstance the Browns are in, it feels pretty unique, and you need to bolster that. But I wouldn't consider it their number one, the most pressing need.
So along those lines, this is best wide receivers available via free agency. And then we'll look at trade as well. This is from Pro Football Focus. Free agency, they go Marquise Brown, number 1, 17th in PFF's rankings. Ridley 2, Mooney, Gabe Davis, Odell Beckham, Tyler Boyd, Curtis Samuel, Kendrick Bourne, DJ Chark, and Michael Thomas. Thomas is kind of intriguing, although he can't stay healthy. Then via trade, they go T. Higgins, the Bengals franchised him. Bengals aren't trading T. Higgins to the Browns. Ayuk, Deontay Johnson, Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton. All right, let's start with the free agents, and we'll go into the trade potentials. Who are the free? None of those guys wow me. It's when I'm relative to free agents. I'm a little intrigued by Gabe Davis if he's at the right price. I'm a little intrigued by Samuel, but I don't know. It kind of seems like a lot like Elijah Moore. And then Michael Thomas, if he's healthy, I'm intrigued by him.
Yeah, Michael Thomas scares me. He hasn't been the same guy. If you got him dirt cheap, then sure, take a shot at him. I'm like you, Dave. Gabe Davis doesn't interest me. So does Hollywood Brown. I'm stunned that he's the highest rated among those guys because he feels like he's been a disappointment throughout his career, but he's got big play capability. He has that speed that I think the Browns are still looking for at that position, right? Marquise Goodwin was supposed to be the guy. Didn't have the season you expected. We've seen Elijah Moore. He's not a down-the-field guy. So I like that idea. And Gabe Davis brings that. Marquise Brown brings that. If you're just going straight up one receiver, Calvin Ridley would be the guy on that list. But I don't think the Browns are going to pay. I don't think they're going to pay a ton of money for receiver. And we can argue what ton of money is, right? But I think Ridley's going to get too much money on the market. And so might Brown and so might Davis, and the Browns might go wait for the third tier of guys. But my ranking would be Ridley, Davis, Hollywood, and then probably Samuel after that.
All right, via trade. There's no way the Bengals are trading the Browns T. Higgins. They are not doing that. Ayuk is intriguing. I don't know. I think he'd cost a ton. Cortland Sutton is the guy. I'm not nearly as interested in Jerry Jeudy as I was 2 years ago or even last year. Cortland Sutton's intriguing. I think Watson and Hopkins, that chemistry, he might be able to develop that with a guy like Cortland Sutton.
Yeah, he's interesting. He's a bigger body, and not that doesn't work, because obviously it does. Sutton's had production. He ran away from Greg Newsome a couple times in that game in Denver last year, so he's got some juice. I'm just trying to find the perfect complement. And if the perfect complement is out there, then you can get the same body type as Amari Cooper or whatever. You can make it work. But I really like that speed dynamic. So I don't not like Sutton, but if I were targeting one specific area, it would be the guy that could take the top off the defense, open things up. We know Deshaun Watson likes to throw the ball deep. And not that Sutton can't do that, right? But maybe a slighter guy who just flies down the field. Ayuk would be the guy on there, but I'm with you. I think he's just going to be way too expensive. And I always like Deontay Johnson, and I think he's unhappy in Pittsburgh. I just don't think Pittsburgh's going to trade him to you.
All right, this from your mailbag, and I'm intrigued by what you think. Would you call Elijah Moore's season a career year? 2 career highs. Most fans seem to be underwhelmed by his usage and productivity, and I think that's fair.
Oh, it is. And the reason it's a question is because Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry, I believe, I know Stefanski did at the combine, but I think Berry did after the season, both refer to it as a career year. And so I'm going to say, yes, I would refer to it that way because by definition, he had the career highs in catches and yards. So you can call it a career year. Now, if his career ends and that's his best year, then I think that would be disappointing for Elijah Moore, for the Browns, for whoever he plays for next, because that's not what you consider career year to be, right? Numbers need to be higher, touchdowns need to be higher. So I think we're splitting hairs a little bit there. But yeah, the mailbag guy is right. He didn't meet expectations, and some of that was set because the Browns traded a second-round pick for him. Some of those expectations were set because the Browns heaped so much praise on him in the preseason and training camp, used him in a bunch of ways that we all expected, at least I expected, Elijah Moore to have this huge role and huge impact, and it didn't materialize. Now, his numbers wound up not being bad, and I think he's a legitimate player in this league. He just didn't have the impact that I was expecting, and I think the Browns were expecting.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a guy that you were excited when they got because he was a pretty high second-round pick, and the production didn't really match that. I can't argue that the production was less than I thought it would be. This is it's interesting. Bleacher Report, hypothetical trade package for Cowboys wide receiver Brandon Cooks. Browns send a 2024 fifth-round pick, 155 overall for Cooks. Cooks, logical target for the Browns, still possesses field-stretching speed. Prior experience playing with Deshaun Watson. Browns could have to create cap room to acquire Cooks. $8 million base salary is reasonable. Scott, I don't know about you. Cooks seems to be a little redundant to Elijah Moore, and he's 7 years older than Moore.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, he's a speedster, right? And he's got production, and it wasn't what people thought in Dallas, right, last year, but it still has pretty good numbers. I think they're right around or better than Elijah Moore's. And I just looked at him, but I can't keep a thought in my head. But I think the touchdowns were better. I think he might have had 6 touchdowns in Dallas this year. This idea intrigues me, and I get what you're talking about, the overlap. But he feels more to me like a stretch guy than Elijah Moore. I think he can take that top off the defense. And, you know, for $8 million, that feels like in the wheelhouse for what the Browns would be looking to spend. So could you go Cooks? Trade for Cooks, 5th-round pick is nothing, right? That wouldn't stop me at all. Trade for him, and then maybe you go draft a bigger body at number 54. I kind of like that combination, Dave.
I get it. Yeah, if we can get CeeDee Lamb and Michael Gallup, we can have the whole Cowboys wide receiving core for Deshaun Watson. Scott Petrick and I can step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, we'll talk a little bit more about the upcoming draft and what the Browns might be looking at. Sports4CLE, be right back. Stay with us. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program is dedicated to recognizing exceptional students, teachers, and schools throughout Ohio. Scan the QR code on screen to nominate students and teachers as Academic All-Stars and Teachers of the Month. They must be currently enrolled or teach in grades K through 12. Is your K through 12 school developing students' literacy skills to achieve success in reading? If so, you can nominate your school for the School of the Year. Students can win $100, teachers can win $500, and schools can win $2,500. Scan the QR code, fill out the forms, and nominate deserving students, teachers, and schools today. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program takes pride in honoring exceptional students, teachers, and schools across Ohio. Submit your nomination today. It's fun, fast, and free. We continue talking Browns with Scott Petrick, Browns beat reporter from the Elyria Chronicle-Telegram, as well as BrownsZone.com. Scott, again, this one from your mailbag. Browns came away from the 2022-2023 drafts with first-round talents in Martin Emerson, DeJuan Jones. Any feel for what the Browns are gaining, an edge in their draft evaluations, or I guess how are they doing it?
Yeah, I wouldn't go that far. You know, I think. Obviously, Martin Emerson Jr. and DeJuan Jones are huge hits. And to me, kind of let Andrew Berry relax a little bit, at least from the outside. Probably not, you know, he probably doesn't view it like this. But until Martin Emerson Jr., you could argue Donovan Peoples-Jones was the best draft pick Barry had made, right? I mean, you had Jedrick Wills, and the jury's still out on him. Grant Delpit, until last year, you weren't sure about. JOK, you weren't sure about. Greg Newsome was still pretty young. So for a while, it was Donovan Peoples-Jones, and that wasn't good enough, right? Because he was just kind of an average guy. Yes, he contributed, but now Emerson is a guy that looks like he's going to be a long-term starter at a premium position. Could turn into a Pro Bowler. I know the guys on the team thought he played at a Pro Bowl level last year. Then you get DeJuan Jones, and as long as he takes care of that body, looks like a guy that's going to start at tackle for a while, right? So I think that allowed Andrew Barry to have kind of a successful baseline where we can start to point to multiple hits in the draft. And the fact that they didn't come in the first round is a bonus. I think it reflects well on Barry and his personnel department. But I don't know if they found some secret. I do think experience helps, and going into your, having 4 years as a GM and a drafter, that really helps. And then I would also give a nod to the analytics, right? I know that they use data as much as anybody. And if you're going to rip it at times, I think it needs credit when I think it plays a significant role in who they do wind up drafting.
The other thing is they seem to be much more patient with their draft choices than previous regimes have been. And, you point to the guys who have come on. I don't know if some of them would have gotten the chance to be around 3 years with previous general managers and personnel guys. So things are going the right way, I guess. This from Dog Pound Daily. 3 running backs who should have caught the Browns' attention at the Combine. Number 3, Braylon Allen, 32-inch vertical, 9'9" broad jump. He's 6'1", 235 pounds. He's only 20 years old. Isaac Garando from Louisville finished with a 4.33 in the 40. And number 1, Jalen Wright from Tennessee, 4.38 in the 40. Fourth at the position in the vertical jump with 38 in his first broad jump, and first in the broad jump at 11 foot 2 inches. So I guess here's the question. Given the uncertainty with Nick Chubb, nobody knows how that knee is going to respond and how Nick Chubb is going to look. Do you think they look at a lower-end free agent? And do you think they draft a running back as well?
I think that's tricky because you obviously need to add someone to that pile because you don't know if Chubb's going to be ready week 1, and you know if he's going to be the same Nick Chubb whenever he comes back. So I kind of think they'll go draft pick first, and then you can always find a running back in free agency, right? Not that it will be Kareem Hunt, but they found Kareem Hunt in week 3 last year. And I think there's usually running backs out there even after the draft, right? That's when you're going to have to make a decision. If you drafted somebody fine, you go with draft pick Jerome Ford, Pierre Strong Jr., and figure it out after that. If you don't draft anybody, then I think you look around and go, okay, who can you get for a couple $1 million? And there's going to be proven guys out there, right? We know nobody's getting a franchise tag. The market's going to be flooded a little bit, I think, with some big names. I think you're going to be able to find a running back. So I think the first spot to watch is the draft. And I'll tell you what, that Wisconsin kid, 6'1", 235, to me that's interesting because Kareem Hunt handled that short yardage, goal line responsibility a year ago and did really well. And, Jerome Ford has the breakaway ability, but I don't know if I think of him as a stick your nose in there and grind out that tough yardage. And if the Browns found that complement to Ford and Strong, I kind of like the big, strong, inside the tackle guy.
Yeah, and both Allen and Audric Estime from Notre Dame, 20 years old, and they profile as the bigger running backs. And we know age is important, especially when you're looking at a position like running back. You want to make sure you're not getting a guy that's carried the ball 500, 600 times in college. All right, we're going to take a look at a mock draft. Before free agency, this is Jordan Reed's 2-round mock draft, ESPN. He has the Browns taking a wide receiver at 54, Malachi Corley. Browns wide receiver room lacks depth outside of Amari Cooper and Elijah Moore. Corley is a sure-handed tackle breaker who could thrive in Kevin Stefanski's offense as a jack-of-all-trades pass catcher. Take a listen to what former NFL wide receiver Steve Smith said about Corley. This is his scouting report on Malachi Corley.
There's a lot of good habits and bad habits. He's a spectacular college player. He has some great college and physical attributes that when God made him, you can't teach it. Played 40 games, 253 receptions, 2,951 receiving yards, 29 touchdowns. His good games, the 3 good games I've watched, and I watched some others too, Ohio State balled against him. I would have loved to see him versus Ohio State, get some opportunities to run outside a little bit more. Balled against USF. And let me tell you something about Louisiana Tech. He needs to be arrested for assault because he assaulted a guy that was just right up my alley, bro. I'm talking about just ran over.
This is not someone who shies away from contact.
Little guy. Got the opportunity to talk to him a little bit over the weekend too, man. I'm super excited. Blocking there. His willingness to block, check. After the catch, check. After the catch, what do they call him, Coley?
I believe he calls himself the Yak God.
Hey, the Yak God. I'm going to go a king.
So, Scott, this is the guy that drew. He's from Western Kentucky, so you have questions about that, just relative to competition. Draws comparisons to Deebo Samuel. I'm careful with those kind of comparisons.
Yeah, no, I hear you, but I haven't seen him play a ton. I mean, I'm sure I saw him against Ohio State in that game, but I know I watched him a little bit at the Senior Bowl, and watching the Senior Bowl coverage, heard the analysts talk about him, and was on a conference call with Daniel Jeremiah, and then to hear Steve Smith right there, I like this guy. And if he was at 54, I think the Browns would be pleased with that. It makes sense, right? Even if it's, Debo's a heady comparison. But that means he's strong, he can run through tackles, and he can pick up yards after catch like those guys mentioned. But you can do a lot with him, right? You can throw him a bubble screen. And the Browns tried to do that. They tried to do that with Moore, and they just didn't have that success. They've really struggled to find somebody that they can do that with. And that's such a key part of offenses nowadays, easy completions for the quarterback. I think that type of player would fit well with Deshaun Watson. The quick completions that can turn into bigger gains. So I'm really intrigued. I need to watch more tape. But I like what I hear and a little bit I've seen about Corley.
Yeah, the one part Steve Smith talking about him beforehand was they do throw him bubble screens quite a bit. They set him up to get into the secondary, and that's what he was talking about. He kind of runs over guys that are not as big as him. And, if you're looking for that, that's a skill.
Oh, it is. And that's different than what Elijah Moore gives you, right? Like, he's got the little quickness, the scat ability, but he's not breaking tackles. And we saw Cedric Tillman do that, but he's a bigger body, right? It takes him a while to get started. Corley feels different to me.
Yeah, and again, we've talked about guys that need to get deep. And I agree. Corley, again, if that is a skill that could add a dimension in addition to finding somebody that can get deep.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And, he feels like he's in that ballpark around 54. And who knows? The Browns have traded out of the second round the last 2 years. But he's one of those guys that when you're talking about second-round picks, which means he's not a perfect prospect, right? If he's going to be around, in the second round of a heavy receiver draft class. But I like that idea. I like some of the other names at 54. It'll be interesting, right? How much the Browns spend in free agency, how much they wait until the draft to address that receiver room.
All right, before we go to break, who would be a dream scenario guy if they find a way to get this guy at 50? And within reason, not Caleb Williams at 54 or Marvin Harrison Jr. at 54.
That's a good question. I mean, I've been focused on the receivers that are going to be there. I don't know. Give me a bottom of the first round, any of those. Receiver, defensive, and defensive tackle, right? If somebody was projected to be 25 and for whatever reason they kept sliding, maybe that Penn State D lineman that's getting so much buzz right now, and his name's slipping me. I'll figure it out. But, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for one of those guys at those three positions that's not supposed to be there that winds up being there.
Kind of like Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah a couple of years ago. You thought he was going to go at the end of the first round. And you know what? Andrew Berry kind of went up and got him to make sure he was there. And that could be a scenario where the Browns trade up.
Yeah, that's a great example. And because they don't trade up a lot, right? That's not who they are. But for the right person in the right scenario, they will. And maybe this is that year. They're not going to give up next year's number one, I don't think, because they need a number one after this drought. But, you know, if you had to give up a 4 to move up from whatever, 54 to 42, whatever it is, this might be when they were willing to do that.
Yeah, and Andrew Berry already said the second-round pick is burning a hole in his pocket, so we'll see how that goes. Scott Petrick and I are going to step aside, take one more time out, other side of the break. Talk a little bit about free agents the Browns probably want back. Then a list of the worst trades in NFL history. Sports4CLE, be right back. Stay with us.
All right, everybody. Let's take 5. With one of these 5 Lady Luck scratch-offs from the Ohio Lottery.
Like the $1 Lady Luck 5X. Because the pink really pops, like my safety vest. Plus a $1,000 grand prize really hammers it home for me.
And this $2 10X really nails it for me. $2 for a shot at 10 grand? That's rock solid.
The Lady Luck family of scratch-offs is the Ohio Lottery's first ever with 5 price points from $1 to 20. They're built for fun.
We continue talking Browns with Scott Petrick, Browns beat reporter for the Elyria Chronicle-Telegram, as well as BrownsZone.com. So the Browns kind of celebrating the year David Njoku had. Take a look at this.
He told me I was going to love it here. The people here are great. The fans are very loyal. And it's funny, I had a gut feeling I was going to be here. And ended up here, so I'm blessed.
Looks middle, and Njoku wide open. 15, corner, 10, 5, touchdown. He's got 2. Surveys the field, launching, end zone. 30, 35, 40, 45. That's what he has done all year. Firing into the corner of the end zone. And Njoku caught it. Touchdown, the Chiefs.
And Njoku with the ball and the go. He's still going. He's pushing the sled. He's pushing a truck. You can't stop that man. That is the strongest dude in the league.
And Scott, we talked about Malachi Corley with the run after the catch. Can you imagine the two of them? If you're a defensive back, you better take your Advil before the game.
Yeah, I mean, the way David played last year, especially toward the end, it was really the culmination of all these years and finally this potential realized. We all saw all the great potential. We saw the fact he was a national high jump champion, right? He runs great. He's built, just, chiseled, but it never all come together. And it did last year for a variety of reasons. He matured, was a big part of it. He became a focal point of the offense. And I think that was something the coaching staff decided heading into last year that he was going to be a focal point. And then he was. And I feel like it could only be the tip of the iceberg, right? He is that talented that, if Deshaun Watson improves on getting him the ball, because Watson didn't do a great job early, and I'm sure there's other reasons, but, Njoku came on toward the end with Flacco. If Watson can figure out that chemistry, they can work together. If the Browns can get a second tight end to take some of that pressure off Njoku, so you don't ask him to block as much. He doesn't set to stay in protection. Like, he can get out and run people over. I don't think there's any reason he can't be considered in that upper echelon of tight ends.
Yeah, and again, the Browns were patient and let him develop. It's kind of something that they're starting to do with the people they draft, and he's a guy that rewarded them without question. One free agent each team should re-sign for 2024, USA Today. Browns, they go with Zadarius Smith. They do put a qualifier on here. If Smith does not price himself out of Cleveland, Browns would love to have him back. He's going to test the market. Browns have a competitive roster, and keeping a quality starter on their team must be a priority. It's going to be really interesting. I'm curious to see the offers that come in for Zadarius Smith. If you paid attention, he had a pretty good year. The numbers, the sack numbers and that might not be reflective of it. But he was a guy that seemed to be in the middle of everything with that defensive line.
Yeah, I mean, he was a starter at a premium position on the number 1 defense in the league, right? Myles Garrett has his first Defensive Player of the Year, and I think Zadarius Smith deserves some credit for that. The sack numbers weren't what he had hoped, I'm sure, but it goes beyond that. I thought he had an impact. I agree that he should be the number 1 target. I think defensive end is more important than backup quarterback, and that's why I would put him ahead of Joe Flacco resigning. And I agree with the money part. If it's 12 or 13 for a couple of years, I think the Browns do that, and that would make a ton of sense to me. I know that when they traded for him, part of that was that he got to be a free agent this year. So he wants to see what's out there. And it might be more than the Browns are willing to sign, and then they'll have to go to plan B. Maybe they draft a guy and pair that with another veteran. We'll see. They have Obo Karanko. They have Alex Wright, but they need that. I feel like they need that number 2, the down-in, down-out end that Smith was for the Browns last year.
All right, before I let you go, this from CBSSports.com, ranking the 10 worst player trades in NFL history. Number 1, Herschel Walker to the Vikings. They traded away a bunch of that. Number 2, Russell Wilson to the Broncos. Number 3, John Hadl to the Packers. I vaguely remember that. 4, Jeff George to the Falcons. 5, they go Deshaun Watson to the Browns. Book is not written on this trade yet, but it's fair to include it. Browns got better last year when 38-year-old quarterback Joe Flacco was brought in off the street and took over. Number 9 on this list is Trent Richardson to the Colts. For the first-round pick Indy gave up, Richardson averaged 33.7 yards rushing, 3.1 yards attempt, 29 total games. The Watson trade, look, his production hasn't been good. But again, what is it, 12 games, 13 games is all he's played so far?
Yeah, it's only been 12, but that's the other part of it. That's not enough, right? Paying a guy all that money, right, $92 million, and he's played 12 games. So that's the biggest thing, right? The availability, and then you add in that it's been inconsistent when he's played. We've seen glimpses, and that's going to be the story. That's going to be the question. If Watson has another year where he doesn't play well and or is unable to stay on the field, then yeah, this trade ranks right up there, and it deserves to be up there because then the Browns will probably be looking for a way to get out of it, like the Broncos were looking to get out of that Russell Wilson trade. And they take a huge cap hit, right? I mean, that's worst case scenario. So you have to at least think about it. It's too early to, like the guy said, this person said, it's too early to say it's one of the worst trades, but I think you could make a clear argument it's trending in that direction after 2 years, and he's going to have to figure it out, and the Browns are going to have to figure it out for it not to be on that list. The Richardson thing is interesting. I remember being stunned when it happened. I can remember being in Berea in that room. I think it was a Monday, and going, "Oh my God!" Like you just didn't see it coming. But it was probably Joe Banner's best move in his time with the Browns because you could tell that Richardson wasn't going to be that guy, and he couldn't. He was slow hitting the holes, all of that, and then he didn't have any kind of career after the Browns traded him. So that's just interesting because Joe Banner's regime here was not great, but he was ahead of the curve on that one.
Scott Petrak, as always, great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Scott.
You're welcome. It was Chop Robinson, the Penn State guy. If he happened to fall, it'd be a good one. Yeah. And again, some speed and the ability to get after it from the edge without question. Scott, great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much. Thanks, Dave. Scott
Petrak, make sure you check him out. Always really good Browns coverage. Brownzone.com on the internet. He is the Browns beat reporter for the Elyria Chronicle-Telegram. It's going to do it for this edition of Sports for CLE. We will see you back here tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow at 4 on Sports for CLE.